My fiancé, Liam, ran a hand over the thick layer of dust on my brother's old dresser, a perfect silhouette of a departed lava lamp left behind. "You know," he said, his voice low, "your mom looked like she'd seen a ghost when you said you were going to finally clear this room out." I just shrugged, prying open a desk drawer that had been glued shut with what I hoped was ancient soda. For me, this was just another chore. My brother, Ethan, the family's designated whirlwind of chaos, was returning to the nest yet again, and I, the family's designated fixer, was on cleanup duty. But Liam was right. There was a weird tension in the air, a frantic energy from my parents I couldn't quite place. It wasn't until I found the small, locked metal box tucked under a loose floorboard that their panic started to make a horrifying kind of sense. My dad actually tried to physically block the door. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about cleaning a room. It was about excavating a secret, and my life was about to be split into two distinct parts, before the box and after. Before the box, my life was a masterclass in accommodation. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. I was the family's shock absorber, the one who dutifully soaked up every impact to keep the precarious structure from collapsing. Our family wasn't a democracy, it was a kingdom, and my older brother, Ethan, was the crown prince. From the moment he was born, he was coated in some kind of Teflon that made it impossible for blame or responsibility to stick. If he broke a window playing baseball, it was because I wasn't watching him closely enough. If he failed a class, the teacher obviously had a personal vendetta. If he crashed his first car, the other driver must have been a maniac. My parents weren't just parents, they were professional spinners, public relations experts for a clientele of one. My role was simpler. I was the stagehand, the one working in the dark to make sure the spotlight on Ethan never flickered. This meant my achievements were quiet, expected. Good grades were met with a nod, a promotion at work with a distracted, "That's nice, dear." My successes were wallpaper, his failures were alarm fires that required all hands on deck, with me holding the biggest hose. I remember my 16th birthday. I had saved up for months to have a small party at a local pizza place with a few friends. The day of, Ethan called from 2 towns over. He'd run out of gas and spent all his money on concert tickets. My parents' reaction was instantaneous. My dad told me to cancel my party, my mom handed me the keys to her car, and I was dispatched to go rescue the prince from his self-inflicted exile. There was no discussion, no apology. It was simply my duty. My friends were disappointed, but I smoothed it over. I always smoothed it over. It was like being the designated driver at a demolition derby. My only job was to stay sober enough to drive the wreckage home. I learned early on that my needs were secondary, my wants were frivolous, and my purpose was to serve as a safety net for a brother who loved to tightrope walk without a pole. It was a quiet, grinding erosion of self, so slow I barely noticed it was happening. It just felt like the definition of family. Liam was the first person to ever look at the demolition derby and ask why I was the only one not holding a steering wheel. When we first started dating, he was fascinated by my family's dynamics in the way a biologist might be fascinated by a particularly toxic species of frog. He was an outsider, raised in a family where love and accountability were synonyms, not antonyms. The first time he witnessed the Ethan effect firsthand, it was during a holiday dinner. Ethan had just lost another job, a flimsy excuse for getting fired after not showing up for a week. He announced, with the dramatic flair of a tragic hero, that he was going to become a freelance photographer. My parents lit up, calling it a brilliant, brave move. My dad immediately offered to buy him a new top-of-the-line camera. My mum started talking about converting the guest room into a dark room. I, meanwhile, had just been passed over for a promotion I had worked 60-hour weeks to get. When I mentioned it, my mother patted my hand and said, "Well, honey, at least you have stability. Ethan needs our support right now." Later that night, Liam sat on the edge of my bed, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "They do know he sold his last camera for beer money, right?" he asked. I laughed it off, the practiced, hollow laugh of someone used to the absurdity. "That's just how they are," I explained. "They worry about him." Liam shook his head slowly. No, Zoe, he said, his voice gentle but firm. That's not just how they are. They're enabling him, and they're using you as the collateral. It was like he had spoken a foreign language I suddenly, perfectly understood. Collateral, that's what I was. I was the stable, reliable asset they leveraged to afford Ethan's constant, expensive failures. His chaos was underwritten by my calm. His irresponsibility was funded by my responsibility. Liam didn't push or preach, he just observed. He would quietly point out the times my mom called me to borrow a few $100s that was never repaid, always for an emergency for Ethan. He noticed how every family conversation was a monologue about Ethan's latest drama, while my life was relegated to a footnote. He was my anchor, the one who kept me from being completely swept away by the family current. He never told me what to do, but his presence was a constant, silent question. How long are you going to keep driving the getaway car for their dysfunction? The phone call that started it all came on a Tuesday morning. It was my mother, her voice, a high-pitched blend of feigned cheerfulness and genuine panic. "Zoe, honey, wonderful news," she chirped. "Ethan is coming home." I closed my eyes, a familiar wave of exhaustion washing over me. Coming home was a well-worn euphemism in our family. It meant another venture had imploded, another girlfriend had kicked him out, another landlord was threatening legal action. It meant he was broke, defeated, and needed a soft place to land, fully equipped with free laundry, a stocked fridge, and zero expectations. "He's decided to take a little break and refocus," she continued, the spin already in full motion. "He wants to get back to his roots, you know. We're so thrilled to have him back under our roof." I could hear the silent and under our financial care hanging in the air. Then came the real reason for the call. "The only thing is, his old room is such a disaster. It's been your father's storage space for years. You know how hopeless he is with organizing. I was thinking, since you're so good at that sort of thing, could you come over this weekend and just get it ready for him? Make it nice? A hero's welcome." I could picture her, twisting the phone cord, a calculatedly helpless expression on her face. I was so good at that sort of thing, because I'd been cleaning up Ethan's messes since I was 10. I had organized his college applications, I had packed his apartments, I had sorted through his piles of overdue bills. This was just another, more literal version of the same old job. I hesitated. The no I had been practicing with Liam caught in my throat. I felt the immense gravitational pull of decades of conditioning. Saying no to my mother, especially when it concerned Ethan, was like trying to argue with a hurricane. It was easier, safer to just board up the windows and ride it out. "I'll see what I can do," I mumbled, the weakest of protests. "Oh, you're a lifesaver, Zoe," she gushed, the relief in her voice palpable. "Ethan will be so happy. We just want everything to be perfect for him." As I hung up, I felt a cold knot in my stomach. It wasn't just about cleaning a room, it was a test, and I already knew I was about to fail it. Liam found me staring at the wall, phone still in my hand. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "The prodigal son returns?" I nodded, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of real, hot anger. Not just frustration, not just resentment, but genuine rage. The hero's welcome was for the one who burned the village down, while the one who spent her life rebuilding it was just expected to hand him the fresh bricks. That Saturday, Liam insisted on coming with me. Moral support, he said, but I knew it was more than that. He was my bodyguard, there to protect me from my own worst instincts, my deeply ingrained habit of capitulating. When we arrived, the house was buzzing with a strange, nervous energy. My dad was pacing the living room, and my mum was fluttering around the kitchen, wiping down already clean counters. The air was thick with unspoken words. "Zoe, Liam, so glad you could make it," my mum said, her smile a little too wide, a little too bright. "Coffee? I've got snacks." It was the classic parental diversion tactic. Keep them fed, keep them distracted, keep them out of the West Wing. The mission, should I choose to accept it, was Ethan's old room at the end of the upstairs hall. It was the Bermuda Triangle of our house, a place where things went in and never came out. My dad clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be encouraging, but felt more like a warning. "Just a heads up, kiddo," he said, his voice strained. "There's a lot of my old work stuff in there. Just Be careful with it. Maybe make a pile of anything that looks important, and I'll sort it later. It was an odd request. My dad's work stuff was usually confined to his meticulous office downstairs. As we headed up the stairs, carrying empty boxes and cleaning supplies, I felt their eyes on our backs. It wasn't the look of parents grateful for the help. It was the look of two guards watching a prisoner on a work detail. The room itself was exactly as I expected, a chaotic time capsule. Posters from bands Ethan liked for 5 minutes were peeling off the walls, a mountain of old computer parts sat in one corner, and every surface was covered in a film of grey dust. But underneath the chaos there was my dad's stuff, stacks of old accounting ledgers, boxes of files, a defunct fax machine. It seemed random, disorganized, completely unlike my fastidious father. "This is weird," Liam murmured, lifting a heavy box of bank statements from the mid-90s. "Why would he store all this in here? It's not exactly climate-controlled." I shrugged, starting on the closet, which was a t-shirt graveyard. Who knows? Maybe he lost a bet. But as we worked, the feeling of being watched intensified. My mom would appear at the door every 20 minutes with a new offering. Lemonade, cookies, a question about a TV show. She wasn't checking on our progress, she was conducting surveillance. She'd peer into the room, her eyes darting around, a nervous tick I'd never seen before. Each time her gaze landed on the boxes of my dad's files, she seemed to hold her breath. It was Liam who finally put it into words. "She's not worried about us throwing out his old junk," he whispered after my mum's 4th visit. "She's terrified of what we might find." The deeper we dug, the more the room felt less like a storage space and more like a hastily constructed crypt. We weren't just clearing out junk. We were disturbing a burial site, and my parents were the frantic groundskeepers trying to wave us away. My dad's work stuff was the topsoil, a deliberately boring and messy layer designed to discourage anyone from digging further. Beneath it, we started finding Ethan's artifacts, and they told a story far different from the one my parents had so carefully crafted. It wasn't a story of a misunderstood artist or a free spirit, it was a story of recklessness and decay. We found a stack of official-looking letters from his first university, hidden inside a textbook. They weren't acceptance letters, they were warnings. Academic probation, disciplinary hearings for conduct violations. The final one was a notice of expulsion. My parents had told everyone he'd transferred to a more creatively aligned school because the first one was stifling his genius. The truth was, he'd been kicked out. I sat on the dusty floor, holding the crisp, damning paper in my hands, and felt a piece of my own history crumble. I remembered the financial strain of that time, how my parents had told me there was no money for me to go on the school trip to France because Ethan's new tuition was so expensive. I had accepted it without question. Now, I saw the lie in stark relief. I hadn't subsidized his education. I had subsidized his failure. Liam found the next piece of the puzzle. Tucked into the back of a drawer, underneath a pile of faded concert ticket stubs, was a bundle of pawn shop receipts. A guitar I had bought him for his 18th birthday. A vintage watch that had belonged to our grandfather. A laptop my parents had stretched their budget to buy him for his freelance career. Each item, a symbol of our family's hope and investment in him, had been sold for a fraction of its worth. The dates on the receipts corresponded with times he'd called home, desperate for cash to fix his car or pay a bill. He had been playing us, creating fake emergencies to fund a life we knew nothing about, and my parents had been his willing accomplices, forcing me to contribute to a fund that was disappearing at a pawn shop counter. Every discovery felt like a small betrayal, a single bee sting, annoying, painful, but manageable. We were uncovering a history of lies and financial irresponsibility that, while infuriating, wasn't entirely surprising. It fit the narrative of Ethan, the charming screw-up. It was a bigger, uglier version of the story I already knew, but the bee stings were starting to add up, creating a swelling, throbbing anger. This wasn't just about Ethan's irresponsibility anymore. This was about my parents' active, deliberate deception. They hadn't just protected him, they had lied to me, manipulated me, and used my money and my sacrifices to do it. The room was getting smaller, the air thicker. I felt a desperate need for a window, but the only one in the room had been painted shut years ago. The atmosphere in the house grew more toxic with every box we filled. My parents' attempts at casual conversation became more strained, their smiles more brittle. They were like two amateur actors in a play where they'd forgotten all their lines. My dad started hovering in the hallway, inventing reasons to be there. He was looking for a misplaced screwdriver. He was checking the smoke detector. He was just stretching his legs. He wasn't looking for anything. He was listening. He was waiting. My mother, on the other hand, escalated her campaign of culinary distraction. She brought up a tray of sandwiches so elaborate they looked like they were catered. "You two must be starving," she chirped, setting the tray down on the only clear surface, the lid of a large plastic tub. Her eyes scanned the piles we'd made: trash, donate, and a small growing stack of "what the hell is this?" papers. Her gaze lingered on that third pile, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Don't work too hard," she said, backing out of the room. "There's no rush. Ethan won't be here for another week." It was a lie, and we all knew it. Her frantic energy betrayed a much more urgent deadline. She wanted us out of that room, and she wanted it now. It was her nervousness that made us more meticulous. Liam, who had the patience of a saint and the investigative instincts of a detective, started sorting through a box of old photo albums. "Your family seems to love collages," he commented, pulling out a page. At first glance, it was a typical family photo montage from a beach vacation about 10 years ago. But then Liam pointed to a specific photo. "Who's this?" he asked. In the picture, a teenage Ethan had his arm around a girl I didn't recognize. In the next photo, she was there again, laughing with my mum. But in the photo after that, the one of the whole family in front of the rental house, there was an awkward gap next to Ethan, and the edge of the photo was jagged, as if someone had been crudely cut out. Liam started flipping through the album. It was a pattern. The same girl would appear in a few photos, and then she would be gone, either cut out or with a sticker placed over her face, or scribbled out with a permanent marker. It was a systematic, almost violent, erasure of a person. "So, I'm a collage?" I muttered, the dark humour a weak defence against the rising unease. "That's fun." But it wasn't fun. It was deeply, profoundly creepy. Who was this girl? And why had my parents gone to such lengths to pretend she never existed? We looked at each other, the same question in our eyes. This was bigger than academic probation and pawned guitars. This was a different level of secret, a black hole of information that my parents had been desperately trying to patch over with smiley face stickers and neatly trimmed edges. The air in the room suddenly felt cold. The dust motes dancing in the afternoon light seemed to slow down, and the house fell silent. The playful surveillance had stopped. It was as if my parents knew we were standing on the edge of the real secret, and they were holding their breath, waiting for us to fall in. The tipping point came with the floorboard, him who noticed it. He was moving the ancient, hulking desk that had been Ethan's altar of procrastination when his foot caught on something. "That's not right," he said, crouching down. Beneath the layers of dust and grime, one of the wooden floorboards was slightly raised, its edge splintered, as if it had been pried up and put back many times. It wasn't loose from age, it was loose from use. A cold dread, sharp and specific, washed over me. This was the X on the treasure map. My heart started hammering against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. This was it. This was the thing they didn't want us to find. I knelt beside Liam, and together, we worked our fingers into the crack. The board lifted with a soft groan of protest, revealing a small, dark cavity beneath. And inside that cavity, nestled on a bed of what looked like old, moth-eaten sweaters, was a small, grey metal box. It was the kind you buy at an office supply store, the kind that comes with a tiny, flimsy key, a cash box. It was heavy, solid, and locked. As I lifted it out of the hole, the weight of it felt significant, not just in pounds, but in secrets. At that exact moment, my father appeared at the door. He wasn't pretending to look for a screwdriver this time. His face was pale, his expression stripped of all pretense. It was pure, unadulterated fear. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly thing I had never heard before. "We're just cleaning, Dad," I said, my voice shaking slightly. I held up the box. "We found this under the floor." The colour drained completely from his face. He looked at the box as if it were a venomous snake. "Put it back," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's just old junk. It's nothing. Put it back, Zoe." My mum was suddenly behind him, her hands twisting in the hem of her apron. "He's right, honey," she pleaded, her eyes wide with panic. "It's just some of Ethan's old things. He's very private. We should respect that." The desperation in their voices was a confession. They were terrible liars, their panic as loud as a siren. For my entire life, I had been programmed to obey that tone, to de-escalate, to smooth things over. The old Zoe would have put the box back, apologized for finding it, and spent the rest of the day feeling guilty. But Liam was beside me, his hand a warm, steady presence on my back. He didn't say a word, but his silence was a shield. He was my permission slip to finally, for the first time, say no. "I'm going to open it," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. My dad took a step into the room. "I forbid it." It was a phrase so archaic, so patriarchal, it was almost laughable. But he wasn't laughing. His jaw was set, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't a request, it was a threat. And in that moment, the last vestiges of my childhood image of him as a protector, as a father, burned away, leaving behind the ugly truth of what he really was, a guard. And he was guarding his favorite prisoner's darkest secrets. The standoff in that dusty, suffocating room felt like it stretched for an eternity. My father stood in the doorway, a human barricade, his face a mask of grim determination. My mother hovered behind him, wringing her hands, her murmurs of, "Please, Zoe, don't do this," becoming a frantic, looping mantra. It was 2 against 2, but the odds felt stacked. They had the weight of history, of tradition, of a lifetime of my own compliance on their side. I had a metal box and a growing sense of righteous fury. Liam was the one who broke the silence. He stood up slowly, positioning himself between me and my father. He wasn't aggressive, but his presence was immovable. "With all due respect, Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice calm and level, "you're making this a much bigger deal than it needs to be. If it's just junk, let her open it. If it's not, then she deserves to know why you're so terrified of what's inside." My dad's eyes narrowed. He despised Liam's quiet confidence, his refusal to be intimidated by the family's unwritten rules. "This is a private family matter," he spat, the words aimed at Liam but intended for me. It was the oldest weapon in their arsenal. The appeal to family, a concept they defined as a secret society where they made the rules and I paid the dues. "I am family," I said, my voice rising. "And if this involves Ethan, and you're this scared, then it's my matter too." I looked down at the box in my hands. There was no key. Of course there was no key. The secrets were meant to stay locked away forever. "Fine," I said, my mind racing. "Then I'll take it with me." I made a move towards the door, and my dad actually flinched, as if I were carrying a live grenade. "You will not," he thundered. "That box does not leave this house." The sheer illogical panic in his command was the final confirmation I needed. Whatever was in that box wasn't just embarrassing or financially irresponsible. It was dangerous. It was life-altering. It was a truth so toxic they had literally buried it under the floorboards of their golden child's room. "Then give me the key," I countered, holding my ground. "We both know you have it." My mother started to sob, a theatrical, wrenching sound designed to engender pity and guilt. "Zoe, you're tearing this family apart," she cried. The accusation was so absurd, so profoundly unjust, that it snapped the last thread of my fear. I wasn't the one tearing the family apart. I was just the one pulling back the curtain to reveal it was already in ruins. "This family," I said, the words tasting like acid, "has been broken for a very long time. I'm just tired of pretending it's not." I looked past them, down the hallway, and made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them for a key. I wasn't going to play their game. I held the box tightly against my chest, looked at Liam, and said, "Let's go. We'll open it at home." The walk out of that house was the longest of my life. My father yelled. My mother cried, but they didn't physically stop us. They just stood on the porch, their faces contorted with rage and fear, and watched us leave, the keepers of a secret that had just escaped its tomb. The drive back to our apartment was silent and thick with tension. I had the grey metal box on my lap, my hands resting on its cold, unforgiving surface. It felt like it was humming, vibrating with the energy of the secret it held. My mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each one darker than the last. Was it evidence of some colossal debt, illegal substances? A secret I couldn't even begin to imagine. Liam drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw tight. He kept glancing over at me, his expression a mixture of steely resolve and deep concern. He knew, as I did, that whatever happened next, there was no going back. The family dynamic, with its carefully constructed lies, and my designated role as the compliant janitor, had been shattered the moment I walked out that door with the box. We got to our apartment and I placed the box on the coffee table. It looked small and insignificant in the middle of the room, a stark contrast to the enormous shadow it had cast over my family. For a moment, we just stared at it. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Liam asked softly, echoing the question he'd asked in Ethan's room, though it felt like a lifetime ago. This time, there was no hesitation. "I have to," I said. "I can't not know." Not knowing was no longer an option. Living with the vague, gnawing anxiety of their deception was worse than facing whatever ugly truth lay inside. We didn't have the key, but we had a toolbox. Liam brought out a crowbar and a hammer. It felt brutal, destructive, but fitting. We weren't being invited to learn the secret, we were having to break in, to take it by force. The lock was cheap and flimsy, designed to keep out a casual snooper, not someone with a decade of pent-up fury and a crowbar. With a sickening screech of protesting metal, the lid popped open. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I half expected something visually dramatic, something straight out of a movie. Instead, the contents were mundane, almost boring to the naked eye. It was just paper. A thick, dense stack of documents, held together with a faded rubber band. No cash, no illicit photos. Just paper. I lifted the stack out. It was heavy, the pages yellowed at the edges. The top document was a legal form, filled out in dense, impenetrable jargon. But I didn't need to be a lawyer to understand the words at the top of the page. Restraining order. My blood ran cold. I sank onto the couch, the papers trembling in my hand. Liam sat beside me, his arm a solid presence around my shoulders. I read the name of the petitioner, the person who had filed the order. It was the girl from the photo albums, the one who had been systematically erased from my family's history. Her name was Sarah. And the respondent, the person she was seeking protection from, was my brother, Ethan Henderson. The restraining order was just the first page of a nightmare. Beneath it, the story unfolded, piece by damning piece, through a collection of documents my parents had carefully curated and buried. There were police reports, typed on flimsy carbon paper, detailing frantic 911 calls Sarah had made from her dorm room. She reported someone leaving disturbing, obsessive gifts on her car windshield. She reported someone following her home from her part-time job. She reported a barrage of relentless, harassing phone calls, dozens in a single night. The respondent in each report was the same: Ethan Henderson, my brother, the charming, misunderstood artist. Then came the letters. Copies of letters Ethan had sent to her, which she had apparently turned over to the police. They weren't love letters. They were manifestos of obsession, filled with delusional rants, accusations, and a terrifyingly possessive tone. He wrote about watching her, about knowing her schedule, about how they were meant to be, and how he wouldn't let anyone or anything stand in his way. The words on the page didn't sound like my brother, the goofy, irresponsible screw-up. They sounded like a stranger, a monster wearing his face. I felt sick to my stomach, a physical, nauseating wave of revulsion. This was the real reason he was expelled from that first university. It wasn't academic probation, it was this. He had been stalking this poor girl, terrorizing her to the point that she had to involve the law to feel safe. And my family's response? It wasn't to get him help. It wasn't to force him to face the consequences. It was to erase the victim. They had meticulously gone through our family photos, scissors and marker in hand, and cut Sarah out of our history, pretending she never existed. They hadn't just hidden his failure. They had hidden his crimes. They had transferred him to a new school in a new town, not to foster his creativity, but to flee the jurisdiction of the restraining order. They had paid for his new apartment, his new life, essentially funding his escape from justice. I found the financial records at the bottom of the stack, bank statements showing huge cash withdrawals, receipts from a law firm specializing in criminal defense, a copy of a settlement check made out to Sarah's family, a sum so large it made me dizzy, a non-disclosure agreement signed by her parents, promising to never speak of the matter again. My blood turned to ice. I saw a withdrawal slip dated the day before my 16th birthday. The emergency money to rescue Ethan when he'd run out of gas. It wasn't for gas, it was for a lawyer. My cancelled birthday party, the disappointment of my friends, my own small sacrifice site, had all been a lie. A tiny cog in a massive, monstrous machine designed to protect a predator. The demolition derby wasn't just a metaphor for his financial recklessness. It was real. He had been a wrecking ball in this girl's life, and my parents hadn't just driven the getaway car. They had bought the car, filled it with gas, and paid to have all the evidence of the crash scrubbed from the road. And I had been in the passenger seat the whole time, completely oblivious, naively believing we were just on another family road trip. I spread the documents out on the coffee table, creating a timeline of deceit. The dates on the police reports, the lawyer's fees, the settlement, they all corresponded with major events in my life. Events that I had only ever understood through the distorted lens of my family's narrative. The summer I had to get a job instead of going to camp, that was when they paid the first legal retainer. The renovations on the house that meant they couldn't help me with a down payment on my first car, that was the settlement payment to Sarah's family. My entire life, my sacrifices and disappointments, had been the silent, unacknowledged cost of my brother's crimes. I was an unwitting accomplice, my financial and emotional resources siphoned away to fuel this massive cover-up. Liam sat with me, reading through the papers, his silence more comforting than any words could have been. He was bearing witness, not just to the documents, but to the unraveling of my entire reality. The person I thought my brother was, the people I thought my parents were, the family I thought I had it was all a fiction, a carefully constructed stage play. And I was the only one in the audience who didn't know the actors were criminals. The most chilling discovery was a small, spiral-bound notebook tucked at the very bottom of the box. It was my mother's handwriting. It wasn't a diary, but a ledger of talking points, of strategies. There were notes on how to handle calls from the university. Stress Ethan's emotional state. Mention his artistic temperament. Downplay the girl's claims, she was unstable and led him on. There were scripts for how to talk to the lawyer, how to frame Ethan as the victim of a vindictive young woman. There was a list of family members to manage, with notes on what version of the story each person should be told. My name wasn't on that list. I wasn't someone to be managed with a story. I was a resource to be exploited without one. To them, I didn't even merit a curated lie. I was simply the bank, the help, the stable foundation upon which they could build their fortress of deception. That notebook was the cruelest cut of all. It revealed the cold, calculated nature of the cover-up. This wasn't a panic-driven mistake made by loving parents in a moment of fear. This was a premeditated, long-term conspiracy. They had actively, and with great detail, planned to not only hide Ethan's actions, but to systematically destroy his victim's credibility. They had chosen their son, the aggressor, over a terrified young woman, and they had never looked back. The person on that page, the cold, calculating strategist, was not the warm, slightly neurotic mother I knew. She was a stranger. They were all strangers. I had spent my life trying to earn the love and approval of people who saw me as nothing more than a utility. I was the family's plumbing, invisible, taken for granted, but absolutely essential to carry away their filth. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the damning papers on our table, the rage that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. It was a clean, pure, righteous anger. The grief would come later. Right now, all I felt was the cold, hard certainty of what I had to do next. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the ghosts of the past, the papers spread before me like a tarot reading from hell. Every few minutes, a new memory would surface, recontextualized by the horrific new truth. Ethan's sudden, violent mood swings that my parents dismissed as artistic temperament. His strange possessiveness over his things. His explosive anger if I ever entered his room without permission. The way he could turn on the charm in an instant. a calculated performance I now recognized as a manipulative tool. It was all there, a pattern of behavior I had been trained to ignore, excuse, and accommodate. By morning, the anger had solidified into a plan. It wasn't enough to know the truth. My parents had built their entire world on a foundation of lies, and I was going to be the earthquake that brought it all down. I started by calling my aunt, my mom's sister. She was the family gossip, the central hub of all information. I knew that telling her was like placing an ad in the New York Times. I kept it simple, factual. I told her I had found some old documents. I told her about the restraining order, the police reports, the settlement. I read her excerpts from my mother's notebook, the cold, strategic plans to discredit a teenage girl. At first, she was silent, stunned. Then came the sputtering disbelief, the attempts to defend her sister. "There must be a misunderstanding," she said. "Your mother loves you kids more than anything." I didn't argue. I didn't get emotional. I just kept reading. I let the words, the cold, hard facts from my mother's own hand, do the work. By the end of the call, my aunt was weeping. Not for my parents, but for me, and for the girl whose name she had never even heard. Next, I called my uncle, my dad's brother. He was a man who valued honor and accountability above all else, a stark contrast to my father. I gave him the same rundown, focusing on the financial aspects, the secret bank accounts, the settlement, the way they had siphoned money from the family's joint emergency fund, the fund he had contributed to for years. He was quiet, but his anger was a palpable force on the other end of the line. He asked me to email him copies of the bank statements. The final call was the hardest. It was to my grandmother. She was the matriarch, the one person my parents still held in awe. Her disappointment was their greatest fear. I drove to her house, the grey box on the passenger seat. I sat with her in her quiet, sunlit living room, and I told her everything. I watched her face, a canvas of 80 years of life, as it shifted from confusion to sorrow, and finally to a steely, quiet resolve. She looked at the picture of Sarah that I had found tucked between the legal papers. "That poor child," she whispered, her hand trembling as she touched the photograph. The dominoes were set. All that was left was to face the architects of the lie themselves. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since we left their house, a constant barrage of texts and missed calls. They had swung from feigned concern, "Are you okay, honey? We're worried," to angry demands. "You have no right to that box. Bring it back immediately." I ignored them all. I was done responding to their commands. From now on, the conversation would be on my terms. I texted my parents, and Ethan, who by now had surely been briefed. "Family meeting, my apartment, tonight at 7, be there." It wasn't a request. They arrived at 7 on the dot, a united front of simmering rage and feigned victimhood. Ethan was between them, a position he'd occupied his whole life, both literally and metaphorically. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, his usual cocky swagger replaced by a sullen, resentful slump. My parents had their game faces on my mother's tear-streaked and pleading, my father's stony and indignant. They walked into my apartment, a space they had always criticized as being too small or too plain, and looked around as if it were a hostile foreign country. I didn't offer them drinks. I didn't ask them to sit down. Liam stood a few feet behind me, a silent, solid presence. The coffee table was bare, except for the grey metal box. It sat in the centre of the room like a miniature coffin. My father spoke first, his voice dripping with condescension. "All right, Zoe, you've had your little dramatic outburst. Now it's time to end this foolishness and give us back what belongs to us." He gestured at the box. The sheer arrogance of his words, the complete lack of remorse, was breathtaking. He wasn't there to apologize. He was there to reassert control. "What belongs to you?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You mean this evidence of a felony? This proof of a conspiracy to cover up a crime? I don't think it belongs to you at all. I think it belongs to the police." The word police hung in the air, electric and terrifying. My mother flinched, and for the first time, Ethan's head snapped up, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "You're being ridiculous." My father blustered, but his bravado was starting to crack. It was a misunderstanding, a youthful mistake. "A youthful mistake?" I shot back, my voice rising. You call stalking a mistake, terrorizing a girl until she has to get a restraining order. Is that a mistake? Or is it a crime you paid to bury so your precious son wouldn't have to face a single consequence for his actions? I looked directly at Ethan. Did you ever once think about her? Sarah, the girl whose life you made a living hell? Or were you too busy cashing the checks my parents wrote with money that should have been for my education, for my future? He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the floor, the picture of pathetic self-pity. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak, entitled boy who had never been taught the word no, and my parents were his creators. Then I turned to my mother. And you, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it felt like it could split the earth. You planned it. You wrote it all down. How to discredit her, how to paint her as unstable. You didn't just protect a criminal, you actively participated in destroying his victim's reputation. What kind of mother does that? I did it for my family, she shrieked, the words a desperate, reflexive defense. I did it to protect my son. He is not your only child. I roared, the words exploding out of me, a lifetime of suppressed pain and frustration finally unleashed. I am your child too. Did you ever think about protecting me? You let me live with him, lend him money, support him, never telling me that the person I was helping was dangerous. You put me at risk. You put my friends at risk. You chose him, and you have been choosing him every single day of my life. You didn't do it for your family. You did it for him. There is a difference. The silence that followed was absolute. They had no defense. The truth, in all its ugly, unvarnished detail, was laid bare on my coffee table, and there was nothing they could say to spin it, to excuse it, to lie their way out of it. They just stood there, 3 statues in a museum of their own making, their kingdom of lies crumbling around them. The fight went out of them all at once. It was like watching a building being demolished, the foundation shattered, and the entire structure simply collapsed in on itself. My father, who had walked in so full of bluster and authority, seemed to shrink. He sank onto the arm of the sofa, his face grey, the fight gone from his eyes. My mother's sobs, which had started as a manipulative tactic, became real, racking gasps of despair. She finally understood that her carefully constructed world, with Ethan at its protected centre, was gone forever. Ethan just stood there, a hollowed-out version of himself. Without his parents' protection, without their endless supply of excuses and money, he was nothing. He was a ghost, a 30-something man-child with no skills, no prospects, and a dark secret that was no longer secret. He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been remorse, but it was quickly replaced by his default emotion, resentment. In his mind, he was still the victim. I was the one who had done this to him. "What do you want, Zoe?" my father asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was the first honest question he had asked me in years. He wasn't asking for a specific thing, he was asking for the terms of his surrender. What was my price for silence? What would it take to make this go away? He still thought this was a negotiation, a transaction, because that was the only way he knew how to operate. Want? I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You think this is about what I want? I wanted a family. I wanted parents who loved their children equally. I wanted a brother I could trust. It's a little late for all of that, don't you think? I walked over to the coffee table and placed my hand on the metal box. What I want, I said, my voice dropping, cold and final, is for you to be out of my life, all of you. I laid out my terms. They were not negotiable. They were to never contact me again. No calls, no texts, no showing up at my apartment or my job. The family holidays, the birthdays, the pretense of a happy, normal family, it was all over. I told them that the rest of the family knew. I told them that Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark knew, that Grandma knew. I wanted them to understand that the web of secrets they had woven now only held the 3 of them. They were on an island of their own making. As for Ethan, I had one final condition. I had found Sarah online. She was a married mother of 2 now, a veterinarian living in another state. She seemed happy, successful. She had survived him. I told him he was going to write her a letter. He was going to apologize for what he did, with no excuses, no justifications. He was going to admit to everything, and he was going to send it to her, whether she chose to read it or not. He was, for the first time in his life, going to perform a single act of accountability. He started to protest, a reflexive, "You can't make me," but my father cut him off. "You'll do it," he said, his voice flat and dead. It was over. I opened the door. "Get out of my apartment," I said. They filed out, not as a family, but as 3 separate defeated individuals. As my mother passed me, she reached out a trembling hand. "Zoe, please," she whispered. I stepped back, out of her reach. I didn't say a word. I just closed the door on her, on him, on all of it. The click of the deadbolt was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The immediate aftermath was a deafening silence, followed by a predictable storm. For the first few days, there was nothing. It was an eerie, unsettling quiet, the kind that comes after a bomb has gone off. I kept checking my phone, expecting a barrage of messages, but there were none. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist. I knew, though, that this was just the calm. They weren't respecting my wishes, they were regrouping, strategizing, trying to figure out a new angle of attack now that their old tactics were useless. The first wave came from my mother. It started with simple one-line texts. "I love you. I miss you. Please call me." When I didn't respond, the messages grew longer, more desperate, filled with curated memories of a happy childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else. She sent pictures of me as a little girl, of family vacations, of Christmases past. It was a classic gaslighting technique, an attempt to make me doubt my own reality, to overwrite the ugly truth with a soft focus version of the past. "Remember how we used to bake cookies together?" she wrote. "We can do that again. We can fix this. A family is stronger than anything." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Family, to her, was a word to be weaponized, a shield to hide behind. She wasn't fighting for her family, she was fighting for her comfort, for a return to the status quo where her secrets were safe and her son was protected. I didn't block her number. I wanted to see what she would do. I wanted a written record of her manipulation. I created a folder in my email and forwarded every message, every scanned photograph, every desperate plea. It was my own box of evidence. When the emotional appeals failed, my father tried a different approach, logic and finance. He sent a long, formal email, as if he were negotiating a business deal. He talked about the importance of family unity, of shared assets, of the complications that would arise from a complete severance of ties. He mentioned my grandmother's will. He talked about the family beach house. It was a thinly veiled threat, a reminder of all the things I stood to lose. He was trying to buy my silence, to put a price on my complicity. He still didn't get it. He thought my anger was a negotiating position, that my boundaries were a tactic. He couldn't comprehend that this wasn't about money or inheritance. It was about my soul. I replied to his email with a single sentence. "My silence is not for sale." He didn't write back after that. The final, most pathetic wave came from Ethan. A string of rambling, incoherent messages sent in the middle of the night. They were a bizarre cocktail of self-pity, blame, and half-hearted apologies. "You ruined my life," one text read. An hour later, another. "I'm sorry, okay? I was in a bad place. Then, it wasn't even that big a deal. Mom and Dad are a mess because of you." He was a cornered animal, lashing out in every direction, incapable of seeing his own role in his downfall. He was, and always would be, the hero of his own tragic story. Liam read the messages over my shoulder, shaking his head. "It's like they're following a script," he said. "The gaslighter, the banker, and the man-child. They really are a perfect team." He was right. Their reactions were so predictable, so deeply ingrained, that it was almost boring. And in that boredom, I found an immense sense of power. Their weapons only worked if I was afraid of them. And I wasn't afraid anymore. After a few weeks, I blocked all their numbers. The storm was over. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't eerie or unsettling. It was peaceful. It was the sound of freedom. Cutting off my parents and brother was like amputating a gangrenous limb. The surgery was brutal and excruciating, but the relief that followed was profound. I hadn't realized how heavy the burden of my family was until I finally put it down. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been the background noise of my entire life simply vanished. I stopped waiting for the next emergency phone call, the next manufactured crisis, the next demand for my time, energy, or money. I woke up in the mornings and the day was mine. It belonged to me, not to them. The first few months were strange. I had to unlearn a lifetime of habits. I had to stop feeling guilty for buying something for myself instead of putting that money aside for the inevitable Ethan bailout. I had to learn how to talk about my weekend without censoring myself, without downplaying my own happiness for fear of it being compared to my brother's latest drama. Liam was my guide through this new territory. He celebrated my small victories, like the first time I let a call from an unknown number go to voicemail without my stomach clenching in panic. We built a new life in the space that my old one had occupied. We filled our weekends with things I had always wanted to do but never had the time or emotional capacity for. We went hiking, we took a cooking class, we spent entire Sundays reading in the park. It was a quiet, simple, and utterly joyful existence. We were building our own definition of family, one based on mutual respect, trust, and accountability. A family where love wasn't a transaction or a weapon, but a safe harbor. The rest of our family, the extended network of aunts, uncles, and cousins, fractured. Some of them, conditioned by years of my parents' spin, fell for the new narrative, that I was a cruel, vindictive daughter who had abandoned her loving family in their time of need. They sent me sanctimonious messages about forgiveness and the sanctity of blood ties. I didn't bother to reply. Other family members, however, had seen the cracks in the facade for years. My aunt and uncle, the ones I had called first, became my staunchest allies. They had confronted my parents, who had predictably lied and denied, but the evidence was irrefutable. They saw the truth, and they chose to stand with it. My grandmother, in a move that shook the family to its core, rewrote her will. She didn't cut my parents out completely, but she put my uncle in charge of their inheritance, setting up a strict trust to ensure that not a single penny would ever go to supporting Ethan. It was her final, powerful statement. The enabling would stop with her. She called me once a week, just to check in, to tell me she was proud of me. Her validation was a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still so raw. I was creating a new support system, a chosen family, and it was stronger and more real than the one I had been born into. About a year after the confrontation, I received a letter. It was forwarded from my old address, the one I'd had before moving in with Liam. The envelope was plain, with no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Ethan. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let his poison seep back into my peaceful life. But curiosity, and perhaps a masochistic need for closure, won out. I opened it. It was the letter of apology to Sarah. He had sent me a copy. I don't know why. Maybe he thought it would earn him some kind of credit with me. Maybe it was a pathetic, last-ditch effort to prove he had done the one thing I asked of him. Or maybe, and this was the most likely reason, he did it for himself, another selfish act in a lifetime of them. The letter was a masterpiece of non-apology. It was filled with, "I'm sorry if you felt," and "it wasn't my intention to." He painted himself as a passionate, misunderstood young man who had simply been too intense in his affections. He talked about his own pain, his own struggles at the time. He managed to write an entire letter of apology that was, in reality, all about him. He took no real ownership, no real accountability. He was still the protagonist of his own sob story. Tucked in behind the copy of the letter was a handwritten note to me. It was short and rambling. He told me that he had sent the letter, that he had done what I wanted. He told me that life was hard, that Mom and Dad were old and sad, and that he was trying to get his life together, but it was difficult without any support. He wrote, "I guess some people are just luckier than others." The final sentence was the one that truly encapsulated the bottomless depth of his delusion. There was no signature. Just those words, a final, pathetic attempt to cast himself as the victim of a cruel and unjust world. I read the letter, and I didn't feel anger or pity. I felt nothing. It was like reading a note from a stranger about people I used to know. He was a black hole of need, and for the first time, his gravity had no pull on me. I was outside his orbit, safe and sound. I did one last thing. I looked up Sarah's veterinary clinic online and found the Contact Us page. I wrote a short, anonymous message. I know what happened to you 10 years ago. I wrote, I know you were telling the truth. I am so sorry for what my family did to you and for what they put you through. I hope you have found peace and happiness. You deserved none of it. I didn't leave my name. She didn't need to know who I was. I just needed to put that truth out into the universe, a small counter-narrative to the years of lies. I needed to let her know that someone knew her story and believed her. I hit send, and then I took Ethan's letter, walked to the kitchen, and held it over the gas flame of the stove. I watched as the paper curled, turned black, and disintegrated into ash. It was a quiet, symbolic cremation of the past. I was finally, truly, done. Years have passed. My life today is blessedly, wonderfully normal. Liam and I got married in a small ceremony on a crisp autumn day. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark were there. My grandmother, beaming, sat in the front row. The family that stood with us that day was smaller, but it was real, built on a foundation of honesty and love, not obligation and secrets. We bought a small house with a garden, and we have a ridiculously goofy golden retriever who now occupies the center of our universe. I have a job I love, a career I built for myself, with my own money and on my own terms. There are days, even weeks, when I don't think about my parents or my brother at all. They exist in a distant, hazy past, like characters in a book I once read. I hear things occasionally through the family grapevine. My parents sold the house I grew up in. It was too big, too expensive, and too full of ghosts. They moved into a small condo. My father was forced into early retirement after some of his creative accounting for Ethan finally came to light in his company. My mother, I'm told, is a shell of her former self, a quiet, anxious woman who rarely leaves her home. They got what they always wanted. They have Ethan all to themselves. He lives with them, of course. He's in his late 30s, working a part-time job at a hardware store, still talking about his big break being just around the corner. He drains them financially, emotionally, completely. They are serving a life sentence of their own creation, trapped in a tiny condo with the monster they built, propping him up day after day because the alternative admitting they were wrong is a truth too heavy for them to bear. They are boiling in the pot they so carefully heated for everyone else. Sometimes, I feel a pang of something akin to pity. They are my parents after all, and there is a biological, primal bond that is hard to sever completely. I grieve for the family I should have had, for the parents they could have been if they hadn't made a conscious choice to sacrifice one child for the other. But the pity is fleeting, always replaced by a wave of gratitude for the life I have now, a life I had to fight for, a life I built from the ashes of the old one. My vindication isn't in their misery. I take no joy in their self-inflicted punishment. My vindication is in my peace. It's in the quiet mornings with Liam and the dog, in the easy laughter with my friends, in the simple, profound joy of a life lived without fear, without obligation, without the constant, crushing weight of their secrets. I am no longer the designated driver at the demolition derby. I'm not even in the stadium anymore. I'm miles away, on a quiet country road, driving my own car, in my own direction, with the windows down and the music up. I am free. The journey from being the family's emotional and financial janitor to being the architect of my own life was not a straight line. It was a messy, painful, and often lonely process. There were moments of doubt, moments when the ingrained guilt of a lifetime would rear its ugly head and whisper that I was the cruel one, the selfish one, the one who had broken the family. In those moments, I would pull out the folder of my mother's manipulative texts, or I would reread the cold, transactional email from my father. I would look at the copy of the restraining order and remind myself of what was real. The truth was my North Star, the fixed point that kept me from getting lost in the fog of their gaslighting. Learning to set and enforce boundaries was the hardest part. It felt unnatural, like trying to write with my left hand. The first time I said no to a request from a flying Moncaya distant cousin calling on my mother's behalf, my heart pounded with adrenaline. But I said it, and the world didn't end. In fact, it got better. Each no to them was a yes to myself. It was a declaration of self-worth. It was me, telling myself that my needs mattered, that my peace was not negotiable. Liam was my partner in every sense of the word. He taught me that a healthy relationship isn't about one person constantly sacrificing for the other, but about two whole people choosing to build something together. He never tried to fix me or my family. He just loved me, supported my decisions, and held my hand while I learned to fix myself. He was the catalyst, the one who first gave me the vocabulary to understand my own oppression, but the work of liberation was mine alone. I had to be the one to walk out the door. I had to be the one to make the phone calls. I had to be the one to close the door and lock it behind me. The ultimate liberation came from a place I didn't expect. It wasn't just about being free from them, it was about being free from the person I used to be. I had to forgive myself for my years of complicity, for my own blindness. I had to understand that I wasn't weak, I was conditioned. I was a child who learned that love was conditional and that my role was to be useful. Breaking free wasn't just about leaving them, it was about unlearning the lies I had been taught about my own value. It was a quiet, internal revolution, and it was the most important battle I have ever won. The person I am today is not the same dutiful, resentful girl who walked into her brother's dusty room all those years ago. That girl is gone. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who trusts her own voice, and who understands that family is not about the blood you share, but about the people who show up for you, who respect you, and who tell you the truth, especially when it's hard. Looking back, that grey metal box was both a coffin and a cocoon. It was the burial place of the family I thought I had, of the illusions I had clung to for decades. The truth inside was ugly and brutal, and it killed the part of me that was willing to sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of a false peace. But from that death, something new was born. The truth, as painful as it was, set me free. It was the catalyst that forced me out of the cocoon of denial I had been living in. The struggle to emerge was immense, but it was necessary. I had to shed the skin of the person they raised me, to be the accommodating, responsible, silent fixato, become the person I was always meant to be. My real life didn't begin until I faced that truth and chose to walk away from the lie. Today, my world is smaller, but it is infinitely more genuine. My circle of trust is tight, and every person in it has earned their place. Liam and I often talk about the future, about the possibility of having children of our own. The thought used to terrify me. I was so afraid of repeating the patterns of my own upbringing, of unconsciously creating another golden child and another scapegoat. But I'm not afraid anymore. I know what a toxic family looks like, and I know, with every fibre of my being, that the cycle of dysfunction ends with me. We will build our family on a foundation of honesty, equality, and unconditional love, the real kind, not the transactional, weaponized version I grew up with. We will teach our children that accountability is a strength, that boundaries are healthy, and that love is never, ever a justification for harm. The ghosts of my past no longer have power over me. They are just a story I sometimes tell, a reminder of how far I've come. I chose to save myself, to break the chain of toxicity that had been passed down through generations. It was the hardest and best decision I have ever made. They say you can't choose your family, but I believe you can. You can choose to walk away from the one that hurts you, and you can choose to build a new one that heals you. So I'll ask you what I still sometimes ask myself in the quiet moments of the night. Did I go too far by cutting them out completely, or was it the only way to truly save myself? Let me know what you think.